We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Wiley, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I sure will. Put your hands over your heart. Again, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Commissioners Michelle Bowers.
Present.
Catherine Carlson.
Present.
Andrew Mercy. Absent. Timothy Wiley.
Present.
Vice Chair Russell Bartlett. Absent. Chair April Bartlett.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Public business from the floor. If an individual is unable to stay through the entire meeting due to extenuating circumstances, a total of 10 minutes is provided at this time, during which input may be given regarding agenda items. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Any person who would like to address the Architectural and Design Commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker card for the recording secretary and identify the agenda item you would like to discuss. Each person will be given an opportunity to address the Architectural and Design Commission at the time such item is discussed by the Architectural and Design Commission. Speaker cards available at the entrance of the council chambers. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Let's see.
I'm filling out for it.
Okay. Let's see. Our first item is to approve the minutes from the meeting of November 7th. All in favor of approving the minutes from November 7th? Take a vote. We have to do this by hand, right?
Need a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. I move that we approve the minutes for November 7th, 2013. Do we have a second?
I second that motion.
Now we can vote. All in favor of approving the minutes? I have to
Aye.
do it by a hand.
Yeah.
4-0.
Motion passes 4-0.
Thank you. Okay, and then now we have the presentation for the Boulevard Music Programming Outline.
Randy Davis, our assistant planner, will be presenting that to you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. As Brian stated, my name is Randy Davis. I'm one of the assistant planners here with the City of Lancaster, and I'll be doing a presentation before you regarding music on the Boulevard. The Planning Department has been directed to work with the ADC to look at the music that we're currently playing along the Boulevard. What motivates you to shop and eat? Does rock, jazz, swing make you want to shop or spend money? The role of the ADC and myself is to look at the current music selection being played along the Boulevard. Currently, we use Muzak through most of the day. In the morning between 7 and 8, we use an iPod in which we play spa, nature-type music. We're going to look at that to see if we need to change those things, to see if we need to change music throughout the day. We'll be looking into seeing what draws people to the Boulevard on various days and what would get people out of their cars and to walk along the Boulevard and embrace the businesses and restaurants that we have along the Boulevard. We want to look at what motivates people to shop and eat. I've done some research, and different music affects different people in different ways. So we will be doing some research on what our target audience is, on what days of the week. We'll also hopefully be able to do a field trip to some outdoor malls to see what type of music that they're playing that draws customers to their location. And then we also need to look at what type of licensing would be required if we decide to move away from the Muzak system that we have, because any music that we play along the Boulevard will require proper licensing. And then after we do our research, if any, we need to decide, is there a change that would be required? Is what the music that we're currently playing, is it adequate, or yes, we're going to change it for a different variety for a different type of music. Currently, Muzak has a list of different types of music that they allow you to play. We have checked off every box that they have. So we have from classical to top 40 to country western, but is that how we want to keep things, or do we want to change it to maybe play the top 40s, or to play old school, or whatever it is that will draw people to come out, like I said before, and shop along our boulevard. So now I'm here to answer any questions that you may have on our role in this process. As long as we're working on it, I see it's going to take us a little bit of time because we have to coordinate everybody's schedules to do field trips, but we don't have a deadline in which we need to complete it. Ideally, I think about 6 months should be sufficient to get this done, and because we'll have different seasons. We're going to go into Valentine's Day, we have St. Patrick's Day, so we can also look to see, when these holidays come up, who's down here on the boulevard shopping, and maybe look into different music to play during those holidays, those individual holidays. And we'll also be doing some tests. We can also do tests within City Hall to get feedback from our staff here as well. So that's a free service that we can use. Thank you.
Have you asked the businesses about the type of target audience that they have, since we're trying to draw people to them?
We will be working with the committee that's been assigned to participate, that's on the committee for the PBID project. They do have a board. Right now, this is just an introduction for the ADC. I have spoken to the city's representative, Shannon Dow, and regarding that, so she is aware of it. She does meet with them, and they have different meetings twice a month. So when we have a little bit more to present to them, we will take that before them, but we will include them in the process so they won't feel left out.
Do you know already some of the other cities or agencies that already have outside music that we possibly be looking at? Or?
Not just yet. When I've gone out on my own, I've tried to tune in to the music. I do a lot of shoppings, but I've never noticed the music, but I'm starting to pay attention. What I'm seeing mostly is the top 40s and a little bit of songs from the 80s. Is what I notice. I notice depending on what restaurants you go into, sometimes there's a lot of loud music. It could be rock, depending on what type of music, type of establishment you're going in. I'm noticing like the fast foods where there is sit down, it's more of an upbeat type of atmosphere as opposed to fine dining, which is a little bit low key, maybe some soft jazz. But other than that, nothing.
And it's up here and down. I mean, in other areas that you've seen, or is it just primarily up here?
Valencia.
Valencia.
Yes.
So we're going to spread out a little bit more.
We're going to spread out a little bit more, yes.
Can I ask a question? Well, yeah, but I mean, I have some specific questions when I ask.
Yes. Is the commission done with their questions to staff? Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, actually, she asked if there was any questions, so
Well, I was asking.
I mean, she's the one presenting, so I was going to ask. But I guess I can ask you guys too. As far as these committees and who the target audience is, now, does that include, I mean, are you guys doing this for school districts? Are you doing it for private places? Or what is it for exactly? Just the boulevard, or?
It's just for the boulevard, correct?
Well, you said you're
Correct.
going to take field trips and things like that, so what is that?
Our commission is going to take field trips to research the music for the boulevard, is what she's just, I believe that's what she's calling
Correct.
us.
Because there are other outdoor malls in other cities, we just want to see what kind of music they play to draw their customers to their locations.
So it would be in order to see what gets them to react to certain things.
Right, it's part of our research.
Right, through research, right, exactly. Okay, and then what was some of the other, and then the funding for that, where does that come from? Does that come through taxing? Does it come through,
It will not come through tax
Property
dollars. This will be on our own time.
what do you mean?
We will have to coordinate our
Who
schedules.
pays for this?
This system's already in place.
Well, I'm just asking who.
The system is already in place on the boulevard, and we're just researching what types of music to put into the
Right,
system.
Like I said, there's field trips, there's licensing involved, there's things like that. I mean, who pays for all that? That's my question.
if I may respond. The time of the commission would be on a volunteer basis for the research. Staff, as far as the research is involved, is already paid through the city. If there were to be requirements for licensing fees or other kinds of things that would come about as a result of the recommendations, the City Council would have to make the decision to appropriate the funds for that as part of their budgeting process, and that's a decision that they would then make.
Okay, and that also pays for, too, when the research is being done. In other words, like say, they submit certain things or whatever. Who pays for all that research? I mean, what happens with all that research? And
The research, to the extent that it's generated by existing city staff, there's no additional cost to do that because staff is already obviously paid for through the budget.
And who assesses that? Who, in other words, decides what stuff is going to be,
That's part of the work program that the ADC would have to develop. What would occur with this is the research would be done. The ADC would look at what that research shows. They would formulate a set of recommendations that would then go forward to the City Council. That would include, if there were necessary funding, that's a part of that, would indicate.
Where comes from and who it actually.
Right. That would then be the decision of the City Council as to, one, whether to fund that, and number two, if they were to move forward with that, what would be the source of that funding. So it's not really a question that I can answer for you right now.
Well, that's always, I'm sorry, but that's always nobody knows, basically where it's going, where the money's coming from, what type of things that they're taking and using for certain research or certain, to find out certain things or whatever. That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm concerned with.
Understood. But the research effort at this point does not add any additional cost into the city budget.
Okay.
And the commissioners are volunteering to do the field trips and stuff like that, so those would be out of our own expenses.
Okay, but, what do you mean? Somebody has to pay for the actual driving, the actual, the communication, like they said, they do things on the telephone, they do things, like that. There has to be some kind of funding for that as well.
We're actually volunteers from the community, us commissioners, and so we don't get paid to help with that research process.
But if you're involved in another type of, say, you're superintendent of the schools or whatever, right? If you're going to do volunteering, wouldn't you have some kind of stake in that at all?
Well, we are members of the community, and that's our stake.
Well, I know, but you're also, you also have others, you're also, involved in the schools and the, things like that. There's also the transportation, I don't know if tourism or whatever is involved in this too.
So I'm not sure what your question is.
My question is there any kind of oversight as to where not only the funding goes, but what kind of information is being used, how it's used, how it's not used, things like that?
What funding are you just, I'm not sure what I'm not following.
There has to be some kind of funding that comes through to fund these projects. I don't think this project is just for right here on the boulevard.
It is for the boulevard. That's what we're discussing. It's for the boulevard. The boulevard has a music system in place already, and this is just to discuss what type of music is going to be played. That's the whole project.
So is that what music is played during events and things as well?
Yes.
So that's part of it, too.
Right.
Well, we currently, like the Chairperson Bartlett stated, we currently have a system on the boulevard. Music is played. It's through Muzak. We already paid for the licensing for that. We're just looking to see if we just need to put more of a certain type of music on there. That's all we're doing. But you spoke about special events. When we have special events on the boulevard, if they're put on by our Parks and Recs department, they handle that. But this is the regular music that's been played on the boulevard since the boulevard went into place.
That's what I'm asking. Is there a reason why that's being done now? Was there complaints or anything as far as that goes, or?
We're just looking to add some music that would stimulate our citizens to come down on the boulevard, something that they would enjoy while visiting the boulevard. The boulevard is a destination place, and we're just trying to make it more enjoyable and more
Lots of
inviting.
destination places.
Thank you. Do we have any other speaker cards for this?
No, we do not.
So we'll move on to the transit-oriented district code.
Yes, I would like to introduce Chris Ani, who's another one of our assistant planners, and both he and the consultant that is working on this will provide you with a presentation on this.
Good evening, Chair Bartlett and Commissioners. In 2012, the city applied for and received a grant from Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which was part of a Sustainable Communities grant to prepare the TOD zones for the Northeast, Southeast, Southwest transit planning areas. These zones provide the way to implement the community's vision and expand the revitalization that is already happening on the boulevard by providing unique and focused development guidelines that enable and promote high-quality growth, walkable, mixed-use, and transit-oriented neighborhoods surrounding the boulevard and the Metrolink station. A year ago, a steering committee was formed and has been involved with creating and reviewing the document. In addition, committee workshops were conducted to obtain ideas and comments from the public. And so right now we are pleased to have David Sargent and Juan Gomez-Novi here to give us an update on the progress so far. And we just ask that you hold all your questions to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, Madam Chair and Council Commission members. I'm going to go through an overview of the code as it has developed at the moment. You're going to receive, or did receive, or will momentarily receive, but a copy of the code itself for you to review. So I'm not going to go through page by page and detail by detail on the code, but rather sort of an overview of the intentions of the code in relation to the objectives and preferences that the community's expressed through the planning process over the last year or two. As you know, the area we're considering is essentially a half-mile radius around the Metrolink station, roughly. And that was just defined in the general plan as the Transit Village planning area, the three sub-pieces that Chris mentioned just now. And so the south, so we have the southwest area, the southeast area, which some additional planning had been done on a year or so before with so much vacant land in it. Then the northwest neighborhood, and then here is the downtown specific plan, is the pink shaded area there. The existing zoning for these areas, the area east of the tracks is all got a sort of a holding pattern zone on it called mixed use that parallels the general plan mixed use neighborhood designation. There's actually three varieties of zoning in there. And so the goal of this work was to provide more differentiated zoning that recognizes the different sorts of environments that exist and that the community is interested in having in the future in that area, and to fine-tune the zoning standards for the properties south of downtown so that as that area may intensify, it does so in a way that's in balance with the community's wishes and the preferences of the neighbors. So the proposed new zoning has organized, these new zones they include all of the requirements that your existing zoning does, use requirements, setback requirements, height requirements, etc. But it has other layers of information in there about the character of the buildings, how they are, especially how they relate to pedestrians, to start to make more walkable spaces that are oriented more to the person on foot and not so much to the car. Still to let cars go around everywhere they need to go, but to develop an environment that is more than that. So they have names that are not necessarily directly related to the use. So the station area zone, which I'll show you in a moment, is intended to nucleate in that area where there's a lot of vacant land, a new kind of an environment that is highly valuable because it's next to your station. And so for each zone, we have a statement. We have you can't see them on here, but I'm going to blow it up in a sec. We have sort of an image, an iconic image of the kind of a place that is intended to be, and then a list of the components that are intended to make that, the kinds of buildings that can contribute to making a place like that, the kinds of frontages, the way that the street front of the property is designed in terms of welcoming a pedestrian and providing the right amount of privacy, or in the case of storefronts, no privacy for the inside of the building, and then some signage standards. So for the station area, so
Where is that? Sorry.
okay.
I was just looking at it.
So for the station area zone, so we define, and I'm going to go through these. I'm going to go through the types for you at the end here, but I wanted to go from the general to the particular, rather than boring you with a lot of details and then telling you what they're for. So the kind that we've described here a range of types of buildings, from including mixed-use buildings and houses and industrial buildings, and then for the station area zone, there's certain ones of those buildings that make that kind of an environment. So you have mixed-use buildings, which is like you have on the boulevard here, that may have housing upstairs, or they may just be a commercial building. Then you have urban apartment buildings, sort of like that one there, that can be mixed in very nicely. You can have courtyard housing buildings that can be mixed in nicely. You could have row houses or smaller apartment buildings. So for each zone, it specifies sort of the range of largest buildings to smallest buildings that sort of comfortably mix and match with each other. The goal here is not to dictate in detail what each property owner does with their property, but rather to present a range of options that if each property owner avails themselves of one of this range of opportunities on their property, and their other property owners do that over time, it'll fit together to make a coherent sort of a town center environment. In this case, in the case of the station area. So here are illustrations of. So essentially, it's walkable, pedestrian-oriented streets with residential ground floors in some cases, where you'd be going into somebody's townhouse or apartment, and in other cases, commercial ground floors, and then office or residential upstairs. So that's right around the station. These are the types of buildings that are envisioned. And the existing character of Yucca there is sort of bleak. And we've made some illustrations that show how by adding bike lanes, by adding a different configuration of parking, by providing nicer sidewalks, and then by allowing these types of buildings to be built along it over time, you can transform over a long period of time, or maybe not. Maybe you'll get lucky there like you have on the boulevard and have sort of, instant success. But to take a place like that and make it into a much more comfortable urban center. We've made some illustrative plans that show how a future improvement to the station could occur to provide access to the Metrolink station from both sides of the tracks. And we've illustrated here how these kinds of buildings that we're showing you, if they were built into these blocks over time, would create a new sort of an urban center where right now you've got mostly vacant land. And here's an illustration of the sort of open space that would be generated at that new station on the east side. So in addition, this type of zoning, in addition to defining just how a developer would be allowed to build buildings on their lot, it's also defining how the city is going to design and manage and maintain the street over time. So a little bit like the boulevard again, not as fancy, not all of them as fancy as that, but that in order to help attract someone to come build a fine building in this area that doesn't look that great right now, this document is a commitment on the part of the city that as that development occurs, the types of street improvements that will be required of the developers will be of this sort of higher quality, more pedestrian-friendly street, so that it can build that kind of an environment one project at a time, as opposed to a lot of cities who have wanted to achieve things like this have just sort of put a planned development overlay on it and figured that as each project came in, they'd think of the right idea of how to get them to sort of spiff it up. But the problem with that is that no two projects adjacent end up sort of fitting together too well, because how you were inspired over here on 1 week and how you were inspired over here a couple years later may be fairly different. So this essentially provides a systematic way of thinking about how you put these pieces together. So that's essentially the recipe. So this is basically the recipe for making that kind of a station area where you've got multi-story buildings with lively streetscapes and a lot of people can live and work upstairs and shop on the ground floor or live on the ground floor. In the case of the commercial corridor, which includes certainly Lancaster, Avenue J, Avenue I, and Division, it's pretty much a different pattern for the most part. So what's going to happen there fairly often, because the lots are shallower, is you'll have a building and then you'll have its part. All the parking won't be behind the buildings like it is mostly here on the boulevard, and like we're envisioning it can be on Yucca because you've got such deep lots there. Here you've got shallower lots, so it'll be more like building, parking, but the sidewalks can still be very comfortable and walkable, and the buildings can still come up to the street with nice fronts. And so the types of buildings that are recommended for that situation are listed here, and the types of frontages are recommended there. And it has if these types of buildings and frontages are systematically employed, it can transform an environment like this, which is currently what you see up on part of Avenue I, to something that looks more like that, just by very carefully improving the quality and width of the sidewalks and the landscape, and then having a consistency in terms of where the new buildings sit, that they sit sort of at the sidewalk rather than back behind a parking lot, and that the parking lots would then be around behind the buildings, just like they are actually on these older buildings. But to essentially make that the zoning so that happens systematically rather than just by virtue of a particular developer having a kind intention. And a lot of attention in the code is paid to frontages, so that along a major street, instead of something like this, which that's at 10th Street West, and that was just houses, and that was a long time ago that they were built, and 10th Street West was a very different kind of a street. It wasn't 5 lanes. It didn't have all that traffic. So it was great to just have a house there in sort of a rural environment. But as it evolves, there's now the possibility that, and I'm using this as an illustration, this zoning doesn't cover 10th Street West, but this is an illustration we made for another purpose. So this applies to Avenue I or Avenue J or Lancaster Boulevard. So where you have a sidewalk that's like this, where you're sort of feeling like the traffic is going to hit your elbow as you walk up the street, you can insert a row of parking, a bike lane, some trees, and then bring this kind of frontage where the businesses are showing you their wares, giving you a place to sit outside and eat. So essentially to animate that frontage along the street rather than just letting it be empty. For the employment commercial zone, which we've defined along the north end of Yucca up near Avenue I and the south end of Yucca down closer to J, this is an illustration where this is Yucca north of Lancaster Boulevard, and the lots are very, very deep there, and there's room for a great deal of parking to occur behind those buildings before you get to the railroad tracks. Here's Sierra Highway, and here's the railroad So this would be a pattern that would allow a lot of opportunities for investment. It could, if somebody wanted to have just a retail business, they could absolutely just retain or build a new one-story retail building. If they wanted to have an office, they could build a 2- or 3-story office building. If they wanted to build a building that had ground floor retail but some apartments up above, they could do that as well, which would be a good way it would be an opportunity to get probably some relatively affordable housing near the middle of town where you can walk to Metrolink, walk to downtown, etc. So, in this employment commercial, the vision is that it's sort of a cross between office and very light industrial. So you could get. It's not easy to kill these lights there, is it? That are shining? Probably not, right? Okay. That you can get, not in addition to getting the sort of downtown sidewalk, you could get sort of more informal sidewalks where employee gathering areas or bicycle parking or eating lunch could happen sort of out to help enliven the street. The whole idea of this is to make the streets part of the community life rather than that all happening in people's backyards. There's a kit of parts that we've put in here for making these streets more pedestrian friendly over time. Where in the case of a street like this, you can add these bulb outs at the corners and add crosswalks and add angled parking. This is certainly envisioned on Yucca Street, and there may be some other opportunities for that sort of thing too. So it's essentially a suggested approach that the Public Works Department can work with over time to take some of the streets that are very wide and really mostly good for cars and gradually introduce better pedestrian facilities along their edges. Similar idea for the light industrial zone, the workshop district zone, where you've got a lot of existing streets without sidewalks, suggesting some standards where adding landscape and parking along the edges could make them much more comfortable over time. In the neighborhood medium, that's the areas where you currently have mostly houses, but you also have had in the past multifamily zoning. No, not at all. But this is for an instance where existing areas have mostly houses, but the zoning has already been upzoned to multifamily. But in a lot of those places, nobody's actually come in and built a big apartment building yet. So the purpose of this, an important purpose of this zone, is so that when and we're expecting that with the success that downtown's been having, there's going to be increased impetus for people to reinvest in properties that they own where the zoning allows something more intense to be built. So we wanted to make sure that if multifamily buildings are inserted into some of these areas where there's mostly houses, they go in forms that are not incompatible with houses. So these types, for instance, this is a house, but these are townhouses. And just by the way they're designed, they really look very similar. This is multifamily, but it's organized around a courtyard, so it looks very green and not dense. So here's just a couple little illustrations. So if you have an area that's just all houses so far, and if the zoning allowed somebody to come in and put those 3 lots together to build multifamily on, we've all seen places where somebody came into a neighborhood where it was houses before, and then they just put up this big old stucco box of a thing, and it changes the value of the houses all around it. So these building forms that are built into this include, for instance, a courtyard type where instead of having just a big box along the street, it actually has 2 pieces that are sort of the same size and scale as a house with an open space between them, so that the density is pushed into the lot rather than expressing itself right on the street next to your house. So you don't have like house big, huge thing, house. You have sort of house, 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 even though there's multiple families living in there. And another example of how a small corner building could be inserted onto a lot that had been previously occupied by a house. Then in the neighborhood low zone, that's mainly the southwest neighborhood, the existing single-family neighborhood around the park. And there is already an allowance for 2 dwellings to be on a lot. And so we've provided types here that show how you can take an existing place where there's a couple houses and replace it with a slightly larger building that might have 3 or 4 or 6 units in it, but it still fundamentally looks like a big house. That's a very significant difference between an apartment, a multifamily building that's just a box versus one that's designed with the scale and character of a big house. The one sort of tends to destroy the value of what's around it. The other can actually add value by bringing in new investment in a spiffy form. Well, a lot of conversation occurred with folks who live in that neighborhood in the workshops we had concerning how the front yards work. And a lot of the front yards, and so there's quite a variety of front yard conditions there now. Some of them are just open lawn with no fence, and then some of them are pretty fences, and some of them are chain link fences. So we've put in here, and you'll read as you get the code from the staff. You'll see that we've included this sort of a low wall type that does a nice job of enclosing your front yard and making it feel private without making it feel ominous like it would if that was a 6-foot wall. And there can be a gate so your kids and your dog are kept in and solicitors don't come bang on your door too much. And so there's a variety of fence types that are included. We've also identified the possibility of actually agriculture, where if people want to grow vegetables and stuff in their front yard, that could also be allowed or encouraged. So I'm going to quickly flash through. This is the nuts and bolts. We're not going to go through this into detail, but so for each zone, so for instance, for the station area zone, there's a diagram that shows a typical lot and where on that lot the building is recommended to be located. In the case of the station area zone or downtown, it's recommended to be right up to the front so that it's just at the sidewalk like a downtown building. Then there's a diagram that talks about building height and what the uses may be of each floor. Then there is a list of which of those building types, whether it's the mixed-use building or the townhouse or the courtyard building, which of the building types is best to go in this zone. And then over here is, that's a continuation of the same thing. And then here it's talking about encroachments. Basically, if you want something to project out off the front of your building, how far can it go and what can it be? And then if you're going to have parking lots, where on your lot can the parking lots go? And in most cases, it's toward the back of the lot because if you're trying to make a transit-oriented, pedestrian-oriented place, then people don't enjoy walking along parking lots so much. So the building types that are defined in some... Now, by the way, this is not about prescribing architectural style. This is talking about the size and massing and shape and position on the lot, and whether they're modern, whether they're Spanish, whether they're craftsman, whether they're pink, whether they're blue. This isn't talking about that. That's what you're here for, to make those decisions about the appropriate architecture. So we're showing some examples of size and general shape and massing of buildings, but they're only intended as examples, and I think that's very clearly stated in the document, that they're for illustrative purposes only, and we're not saying that you're supposed to do any architectural style in particular. So this is the mixed-use building type. The purpose of this is generally to provide an opportunity for business on the ground floor and additional housing or office upstairs. The urban apartment building type is just that. The intention is to provide good housing for a fair number of households in one building with a pedestrian-friendly ground floor, rather than sometimes you'll see this, just the bottom floor is sort of a parking structure and then all the housing is sort of stacked on top of that. That is not recommended by this. It's recommended that if you're going to have it housing, it needs to be housing down to the ground where people step out of their front door to the sidewalk, sort of like the new housing that was developed along the north side of Milling Street a couple of years ago. Very similar to that. Courtyard building types, where you have a common court that is semi-private, semi-public, shared open space from the people who live there, and it has the fringe benefit of also making the massing of the building to the street much less harsh than if it was just one big mass. Row houses, again, very similar to that housing along the north side of Milling Street that was built recently. And then, of course, then duplexes, then just houses, which may be also a duplex. Basically, it's a house that may have two families living in it. And we've also added a type, take a look at it. We're thinking about the fact that the area to the southeast of the Metrolink station is very underdeveloped, and it's not going to suddenly fill in. So it's going to be partly built for potentially quite a while. So we're trying to think of ways that could enable people to make initial investments that start to sort of colonize the place and give it more of a lived-in feel as developers think about building new housing or businesses there. So we've identified this sort of temporary building that has been done in a lot of cities lately, where you have like a cargo container or similar pre-manufactured structure that you can bring in and set down and set up a coffee shop in it, so that you can get some sort of instant business to show up in these places without somebody having to spend years and millions of dollars investing in permitting processes, and there would be a permitting process, but it wouldn't take years. And then finally, the frontage types that just describe the relationship of the front of the building to the street. In some cases, shading it. In some cases, providing setbacks to provide more privacy for the residences. If you have residential on the ground floor, you don't want to be right up at the sidewalk. You want to be set back and maybe up a little bit to have a greater sense of comfort about living there. So it's really not, and again, this is not about saying your porch has to look like that. It's just suggesting the porch as a device, and it could be it could all be made out of stainless steel, or, it could be anything in terms of style. The point is how it affects the relationship between the person walking past on the sidewalk and the person inside the building. How does it make the person inside the building feel comfortable about living there? And they're all options. There's no one of these you have to do. It's it's a menu of choices. And
Is this online somewhere?
I'm sorry, did you fill out a speaker card?
No, I have to go, but is this online?
You're not supposed to interrupt the meeting. You can fill out a speaker card.
And then there's a bunch of definition of types of signs. I'm not going to go through them, but essentially, the point of this approach to signs is that rather than treating them sort of as an annoyance from a design standpoint, it suggests a whole bunch of choices of kinds of signs that reinforce the kinds of pedestrian-oriented places that you're trying to make. So it's a bunch of kinds of signs that are often not highlighted in sign ordinances that are just very effective ways of getting, if you're in business, effective ways of getting your name in front of the customer in these kinds of places to help improve the design of the place and provide you with the identity that you need to have a successful business. And finally, we've defined the idealized street reconstruction or street improvements for some of the streets over time to try to get medians right now where you have just left turn lanes striped down the middle of some of the big streets. As funding might become available through grants or other mechanisms, it's just suggestions about where you might be able to insert landscape into the middle of some of those streets to start make them feel greener and more comfortable, cut the wind a little bit, and we've done those for several different streets. And these public frontage types are essentially, this is that kit of parts I was mentioning that the Public Works Department could use to help them think about how they could go in and add some landscape or widen sidewalks or add crosswalks into the streets as the place starts to become more lived in, to help both attract and reinforce new investment that's coming in. That's it.
Thank you.
Well, sure. We'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does anyone have any questions?
Actually, I do. I was hoping that you, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very informative, and I know that it's very obvious a lot of work and effort went into preparing this. You had mentioned at one point that there had been community meetings.
Yes.
So if you could share a little bit more about what that process looked like, about how many meetings and how many participants and from where?
Yes. Well, there's sort of two parts to that answer. One is that there was a separate effort prior to this, which was a conceptual plan for the Southeast Transit Village planning area, which is basically south of Lancaster Boulevard and east of the tracks, and north of J and east of Division, west of Division.
Okay.
Okay. And we did that a couple of years ago, and we had, I don't know, 2 or 3 for the STVPA. We had like 2 or 3 community workshops.
Yes.
And we also had stakeholder interviews where we had one-on-one interviews with quite a few people who own the little industrial businesses in that area. We met with them a lot of times, and got a good, it was very enjoyable for us. I think they enjoyed it too, but well, we sure did, because they were very clear about their interest in both retaining the success they have now, but also having the opportunity to expand or relocate their business over time. For instance, there's a few of those businesses that are in the area pretty close to the train station where in the future probably the highest and best use of that would be transit-oriented housing or office. And we spoke with quite a few of those property owners, and they said, well, you know, we're not looking to change what we're doing with our land right now, but if there's something better we can do with it in 5 or 10 years, we'd love to do that. And then, you know, we'd move our muffler shop, you know, a little farther away. So we had those conversations a lot, and that was the basis of the land use plan for that piece. And we've also had workshops where quite a few residents of the neighborhood to the southwest south of downtown neighborhood have come in and shared their thoughts and feelings with us mainly about density and how they don't want inappropriately large buildings to have a negative effect on their property. And also a lot of discussion about how what they see the front yards should look like, what kinds of fences they like and don't like. Yeah, so we've had, I don't know, altogether probably, 8 or 10.
Yeah, I would estimate that's probably correct. We had quite an active amount of input from the business owners that are out in what we refer to as the Herald Tract.
Right.
And the attempt of the plan here is to retain those viable businesses because they're valuable from
Yes.
employment, revenue standpoints. But as David indicated, they're looking in the long term too. If they want to relocate or something, they want to make sure their property can be valuable for something else also. And I think they started out kind of a little suspicious of why we were suddenly interested in their area, and at the end of it, I think they were extremely pleased that they had the opportunity to give the input, and that's been carried over into the same list of code.
Because those industrial lots, I mean, the whole place was lotted for houses, and then at some point, the decision was made that the use on that southerly portion would be industrial. But those, if you look at them, the lots are 50 by 100 and they have alleys. So that it was sort of always set up for housing. And as people grow and as those businesses grow, then they'll probably relocate to somewhere that just has larger lots. But in the meantime, the regulations allow them to continue doing exactly what they're doing and thrive right where they are. And if they want to do something bigger and fancier later, and then their property can be sold for some future valuable uses as well.
I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
Well, I was just curious, so with the planned, the potential growth in both residential as well as commercial.
Yes.
Have the streets, or has there been consideration given to the flow of traffic and the number of trucks and the amount of cars and all of that?
Well, yes and no. There hasn't been, it's not a project in that sense. It's essentially reshaping the zoning that's already there.
Right.
So there hasn't been a detailed traffic study of like turning movements of trucks and stuff. But we have had throughout this a consulting transportation engineer who's been part of our team, and the city's public works and traffic folks we have worked very closely with to make sure that the typologies of streets here are gauged to handle the expected amounts of traffic. And I would think that before any significant changes were actually made to the design of individual streets or prior to the construction of any significant development projects, there would be further analysis of that to make sure that it worked.
Thank you.
The code part is not included in our packages.
I think you just got this little PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, it'll be provided to you via the link and the copy of that, so you can see that in detail.
Okay.
The intention of this presentation was really just to sort of give you a preview of it, so that when you're reading the details of it, you hopefully if we've done this right, you would have sort of the high-level view of what it's trying to do before you get bogged down in, how many stories of this and how many feet of setback of that. So this was sort of what are we trying to make here? And then the code is sort of trying to be the recipe for making that sort of one project at a time.
Yeah, I will be sending out the code, and you'll just take your time to look it over, and any comments you have, just let us know. And by the time we come to the next meeting, if you guys need any more time, that's fine. Or if you're ready to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission for adoption, that's what we can do for next month. So just take your time, let us know if you have any questions.
Is this available to the public online as well?
It will be, yes.
It will be.
Okay. Possibly next week, I'm not sure.
So it'll just be on this.
I can send it to you.
Any other questions? Commissioners? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Bartlett, you can ask for any public input on this item. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes if they wish to give it.
Okay. Is there any public input on this particular project?
So anybody, you could be living in one place and somebody can put something and change
Excuse,
You're welcome to speak for 3 minutes. You can come up to the podium and you'll have 3 minutes.
I mean, I don't understand how something
no,
like this could be
ma'am,
okay.
ma'am,
Yeah.
come to the podium. You have 3 minutes to speak your comments to the commission, please.
I mean, what this is doing is it's putting something in place of another thing, right? Like, in an area, like, say, where I live, it could be, something else could be, not even at my place, but somewhere else, and it could be everything that's going on at my place, or at the other place, could be, in turn, being said what's going on at my house, right? Is that
Do you,
right?
do you live in the transit-oriented district?
Obviously, I could be.
Then if you did, then this would affect you.
Okay, so is this the plan for everywhere?
It's for the specific area that was discussed.
What do you mean, a specific area?
Did you
Well,
watch the
I mean,
presentation?
I know, you all these things that they say, oh, they're completing this, and they're building this, roadway in this area, and then you go over there, and there's nothing there, There's nothing built over in that area. So that's why a lot of people are wondering, where's this power plant going? Where's this, where's this school actually at? Where's this, all these other things where accidents happen, where all this, and it can be put anywhere, right?
This is for a designated
That's
specified
crazy, yeah.
area.
Well, I don't think it's right. I mean, it's how would anybody even know what's going on at any given time? You'd wonder why things are happening. I wonder why people, think they're crazy or whatever for why things are going on, why they're being taxed for things, why they're being, charged for things, why they end up at the hospital. I mean, how can this be okay? Who knows who's doing what and who's paying for what and who? Does anybody have an answer?
These are meant to be improvements to areas that already
Improvements?
exist.
For when?
Excuse me, I listened to you speak. It's your turn to listen to me.
No, I've been
So
having
it's-
to put up with everybody's crap all this time.
It's not about crap.
No,
It's about trying to improve the people that already live there. And if there is a
people
different
that haven't
building
done-
that's built, it's because the owners of that building have started making a difference. We're not coming in, we're
The
not
owners
trying
of
to
the
take
building,
away
what if
from
the owner of
anybody.
the property before the building was there? Does the person who puts the building there now become the owner of the property?
That's usually what happens when somebody builds a building, when they buy a lot and when they start building.
So if you put something there, it could not even be that particular place. It could be a different place, right?
We're talking about this specific area because a large portion of that is in industrial lots.
Of what? Which is the parking zones now, or what? What do you mean? It could be an industrial lot one way and a housing tract in another, right?
When you get to look at the presentation up close, I know the maps are really hard to see from that far away,
Right.
but you can see the specific
No, I can
places.
see it. You can turn it any way. I can see the map.
You're welcome to check out the website and the link he's going to send you, and you can do your research.
It's not I mean, but do other people know about it? I mean, can you put it on something?
It's
so that-
public notice.
Where? How? Just by saying that it's in one thing? That it's a lot of people don't understand what's going on.
You're welcome to check out the link that he's
why
going to
is
send to you, and you can review it, and then I think you'll have a better idea of what this is.
I have a really good idea of what it is.
Okay.
Is it areas so that you can hide certain things so not everybody knows what's going on?
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
I don't.
Do we have any speaker cards? No?
No, Miss.
Okay. So we'll move on to public business from the floor. Non-agendized items. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the commission on any subject regarding city business. Under state legislation, no action can be taken on non-agenda items. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the commission regarding items not specifically referenced on the agenda. Please complete a speaker card for the recording secretary. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each.
I have no speakers cards, Ms. Chairman Bartlett.
I move that we adjourn this meeting to Thursday, March 6th at 5 p.m. All in favor?
I'll second, and all in favor?
Okay. Meeting adjourned.